I've been meditating on a passage in John chapter 15, some of the teaching of Jesus lately, verses 9 to 11. Let me just give you an abridged version of the things that I feel like the Spirit has been showing me and see if if it doesn't do the same thing for you as it does for me. In verse 9, Jesus said, "As the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. Now remain in my love. If you keep my commands, you'll remain in my love, as I have kept my Father's commands and remain in his love. I've told you this so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be complete." I'm really struck by this passage. It's something fresh that I hadn't seen before, has been dawning on me. So let me share this, kind of unpack this a little bit, real briefly. So each line is profound to me. As the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. Let that sink in. I mean, as far as it can. Uh, I mean, so is he saying, I love you in the same way the Father loves me, for the same reasons, to the same extent, to the same degree? I mean, think of the implications of that if that's what he's saying. Um, in the same way the Father loves him, he loves us. That's unfathomable to me. I mean, that kind of reminds me of Paul's prayer to the Ephesians, or to God for the Ephesians, when he says that God would grant you the ability to see how wide and long and high and deep is the love of God, and to know this love that surpasses knowledge, that you might be filled with to the full measure of the fullness of God. Again, unfathomable, but let it sink in as far as it can. But then Jesus said, "Now remain in my love." What does that mean? Remain in my love. Kind of reminds me of Jude 21, where he says, "Keep yourselves in the love of God." I mean, does that mean you can go someplace that he won't love you? You can do something that would keep him from loving you? I don't think so. But I do think it means that you and I have the ability to reduce our enjoyment, our experience of God's love, to mitigate it. To reduce our experience of it doesn't mean to change the reality of it, because that's fixed, that's constant. God's love is constant. His agape love is constant. But there is something that we have to do with remaining in his love. And I think it has to do with our experience, our enjoyment of it. Like the little girl who was bad and she thought her dad didn't love her, and so she said, "You must not love me. I've misbehaved." And he said, "No, honey, I always love you. When you're good, I love you with a love that makes me glad, and when you're bad, I love you with a love that makes me sad. But I always love you." And that's the way the Father's love is, right? So he says, "Now remain in my love." Now he tells us how to do that. He said, "If you keep my commands, you'll remain in my love." If you keep my commands, you'll remain in my love. Now, does that mean if I disobey, God won't love me? No, it means as I obey, I increase my capability, I expand my enjoyment of and experience of God's love, so that I can reflect it back to him. I don't obey so he'll love me, but I obey since he loves me, and because I want to please him, and because I want to enjoy and experience the full measure of his love. So his love is constant. Our enjoyment of it isn't necessarily constant. And the X factor is obedience. It's following Jesus, doing what he says. So it's kind of like we can mute his voice. Doesn't mean he stops speaking. It just means that we don't hear what he's saying. And so we can mute his love song. I mean, it doesn't mean he's not singing it to us, his love song. It just means that we won't be able to hear it. And you can't very well enjoy a song that you can't hear. It's like muting somebody on Zoom, or they mute themselves and they talk, but you can't hear them. You can see their mouths, their lips moving, but you can't hear them. I think in some way that's the way it is with God's love. So he said, if you obey my commands, you'll remain in my love, just as I have obeyed my Father's commands and remain in his love. So again, there's this comparison between his experience of his Father and ours. And he's saying, if you'll obey, you'll remain in my love, just in the same way that I obey and remain in his love. So Jesus is saying that his obedience keeps him within the parameters of the enjoyment of the love of God, not of the reality of his love, but because there's never we can't imagine the Father not loving his Son Jesus, but he always loves him. There was a time when Jesus did not experience the love of God, and that was when Jesus was on the cross, and he said, my God, why have you forsaken me? It doesn't mean that the Father didn't love his Son anymore, but the enjoyment of it and the experience of it was muted, let's say, while Jesus was on the cross, because he had our sin, our disobedience on him. And if obedience is that X factor, Jesus always obeyed, but then on the cross he became sin that we might become the righteousness of God. So then he says, I've told you all this so that my joy may be in you and your joy may be complete. So he connects our experience with the unfathomable love of God with our joy in God. He says, I've told you this so that my joy may be in you. His joy, what is his joy? His joy is the constant experience of the Father's love. He's experiencing God's love, and it's that exquisite love of God leads to an exquisite joy in God, and that's what Jesus was experiencing. And he's saying, I want that joy. I want my joy to be in you, not just a joy, but his joy. This whole passage is blowing my mind, really, because he's saying the joy that I'm experiencing in the Father's love, I want you to have that inside you. And that reminds me of that in that parable at the end of days when Jesus says what you'll want is to be able to say, to hear the Father say, enter thou into the joy of thy Lord, into his joy. In other words, enjoy the joy with which he enjoys you. Again, like I said, this is profound. I'm not saying my words are profound or my explanation of it is. It's paltry by comparison, but the experience of his love and his joy blows my mind. And the way to have that and to know it and to have it experience it is obedience to his commands. There's no other way. You can't detour obedience and following Jesus and doing what he says. You can't detour around that to get to joy. It just doesn't work. Maybe that's why David said, restore unto me the joy of your salvation, because he had stepped out of obedience, lost his joy. When he came back to it, he's saying, he comes back to God and he says, I need that joy again and I will obey. And then the last phrase he says, that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be complete. Not just some joy, but complete joy. Not a little bit of joy, but complete joy. Just like it wasn't a joy, but his joy. Now it's not just some joy, a little bit of joy, but joy that's complete. It's not partial. It's not incomplete. It's not a shallow joy like we can find in other places. And so this complete joy is when you experience the love of God in the way that he exudes it, and to that extent. And so what I'm saying, my friends, is that we're invited into his complete joy rooted in his profound love. I hope that helps. God bless you.